Hello, and welcome to AWS Review, a weekly look at what's happening at AWS and how it may change how you do business. I am your host, Michael Krause, and I'd like to welcome you to another in real life episode. Today, we are chatting with John Moberg, CEO of Conductive Digital. John has over 25 years of experience as an executive leader and entrepreneur. During this time, he has successfully blended technology and business needs with many companies, including Allegiant Utility Services, Concord Utility Services, UnitedHealthcare, Best Buy, Geek Squad, 3M, Royal Bank of Canada, Intel, Jamba Juice, and Caribou Coffee. His most recent endeavor directly benefits the utility industry. As founder of Conductive Digital, he led the development and release of Peak Workflow, a modern work order management platform for the smart grid field deployment and data management across water, gas, and electric markets. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about a little more about yourself and about Conductive Digital.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I've been in the business of technology for quite some time, and blending that with more of the business technology. I'd say more from a marketing perspective than and digital marketing perspective than sort of the IT world. More of a creative flair. My background is in graphic design and a minor in computer science, so it turned out to be a really good time to have that when I graduated way back when. Nevertheless, as you mentioned, Conductive is a SaaS company that has a flagship product that enables providers, utility providers, co-ops, municipalities manage their mass deployment initiatives. It's a very purpose-built platform that is geared towards always listening to our clients and creating the functionality that really worked for their situation, and driving that through to completion and deployment. So it's very customizable, but it's not your off-the-shelf generic fieldwork solution that sometimes you go to a solution site and they're, hey, we got all these industries and 122 industries and we do everything.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
we all know how that works out, and they don't do everything very well. So we decided to focus and do one thing very well.
Excellent.
So,
Excellent. How are
yeah.
your customers responding to this offering?
We hear a lot, very well. We hear a lot of, hey, this is 10 times better or 100 times better than any other solution that we used in the market. Now, of course, that warms my heart to hear that. But I got to take their word for it and understand that these guys are out in the field using all kinds of different tools, but they, choose to give kudos to us guys, and that's fantastic. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
That's excellent. So before we dive into some of the technologies that you're using, let's dig a little bit more into kind of your history and your learnings. So, share with us some of the kind of important lessons you've had in your career, maybe what you find to be the most important lesson.
Oh gosh. Um, well, first and foremost, building the right team. Obviously, understanding what you're trying to accomplish and what your goals are, but building the right team, having the right people, having the right experts involved, those types of things are uber important. Um, I'd say on pair or on par with that, listening to your customers, and I've said that before, but I'll say it again and again throughout throughout this series, is you need to partner with them. You need to leverage them as your advisory group. They are always going to be a better subject matter expertise or expert than you are when you're supplanting. So, in years of being around a digital agency for 20 years, and it was always interesting because I attempted to come in and learn as much as I could and apply the technologies that related best to what was going on. But it always started with a deep dive learning session of, okay, how does your business work? Okay, how do you make money? Okay, how does that work? And tying all that together to better institute the technology solution that really fit those business needs. And that was really key.
Awesome. So you've been around for quite a number of years, working in business and technology. What, in your mind, has changed from when you started to today?
Um, well, I don't have to go build a data center and have 22 million in servers and all of these other aspects.
Yeah. You get
And
started with lower capital, that's for sure.
oh my God, yeah. Well, the business model that I'm in, frankly, we started this, or I started this 4 years ago, and I would not be able to do this without cloud technologies like AWS.
That's
Um,
awesome.
we're all in on AWS and completely serverless, and have no EC2 instances, other than one that's kind of piggybacking some open VPN connections and things, but we're working on getting rid of that too.
Awesome.
Nevertheless, you wouldn't be able to complete any of this stuff without cloud services and infrastructure as a service.
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more. It's amazing how many companies have been able to really transform and change how they do things because of companies, cloud services like AWS. So good segue. Let's talk a little bit about how you're using AWS. So what are kind of some of the key AWS services that you rely on?
Yeah, sure. So Lambda is our go-to for all of our code execution, that sort of thing. RDS, specifically MySQL, Aurora MySQL, is our primary data store. As you may recall, we talked a few years back, and we were attempting to squeeze DynamoDB into a relationship square hole, and we were just having challenges left and right. So the relational data service is uber important. We're using AppSync GraphQL. We are not using Amplify with that.
Okay,
We'll get to that in a little bit.
sounds good.
But Cognito, S3, EventBridge, all the usual suspects. The transfer service is really important to us. We do a lot of SFTP with our integration clients, things of that nature. Um, CloudFormation is huge, API gateway. Um, Interestingly enough, we're using REST APIs and GraphQL
Okay, a
uh,
mix.
APIs for different reasons. Yeah.
Hmm.
GraphQL fundamentally has a 30-second timeout. So does API Gateway. However, we can stitch things together for longer running pieces with SQS, and now step functions and a few other things. So it's been really interesting to see how AWS has grown over the last 4 years plus. In the agency world, I started using AWS, I don't know, back in 2008,
Right.
2010, somewhere in there. And that was all, EC2 instances and old school virtual stuff.
Yep.
Now it's getting really exciting.
Yeah, I remember all of that old stuff, and even in the last 2 years, taking a look at what's been going on with AWS in the area of how much they've expanded the integration capability of step functions, the expansion of Event Bridge from being CloudWatch rules and a couple other things to actually being a true event bus that you can
Yeah.
leverage. Yeah, it's just amazing the changes that are going on. How about technologies adjacent to AWS, things that help you use AWS better?
Oh, good question. So we're leveraging I don't know a background library, if you'd call it, or a background framework. Maybe framework is a better term, but serverless.com allows us to, it's not the same flavor as AWS's serverless architecture and their languages within CloudFormation and that sort of thing, but it allows us to write simple YAML that then in turn the platform will generate the CloudFormation template for us and deploy it.
Excellent.
So with one line of code, we're bundling everything, and pushing it out into CloudFormation, generating all of the policies and roles and the entire infrastructure that's necessary. It's a pretty amazing piece.
Yeah, I've used serverless in the past on a number of projects, and it brings a lot of syntactic sugar, a lot of automation to you. You know, you tell it, hey, I
Mhm.
want this REST API to be exposed with API gateway. And it's like 3 lines,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
builds the 35 to 50 lines of CloudFormation code required to make that happen. Right?
Exactly. And it's been a bit of a godsend for us. We started with it 4 years ago, and that's really streamlined a lot of DevOps work for us that we don't have to worry about otherwise.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll add plugins as well is a really interesting piece to the puzzle. The framework has plugins for step functions, S3, AppSync. So our GraphQL is all written in Node.js
Hmm.
for that Lambda, and then pushed out with that piece of the puzzle, the Amplify plugin, or sorry, the GraphQL plugin.
Right.
And then we're also able to use their offline plugins and really do streamline a lot of the code development and push things through. Whereas anyone that's sort of written cloud services and Lambda functions and et cetera, you're always kind of working through figuring out ways to log things out and understand what happened at what point in what service. Step functions is getting really unique at that with X-ray integration and various other aspects. But still, it's the fastest path to done is doing everything local
Yep.
and then seeing exactly what's going on, deploy it, and life is good.
Excellent. So you've mentioned GraphQL and things like that. Just for the viewers and listeners out there, if I recall correctly, you've got a couple of interfaces. You have a mobile interface and a web interface. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're supporting with the GraphQL and the REST APIs multiple different external pieces coming in that you're managing.
Yeah, exactly. The GraphQL really supports the web UI display of data, including a robust mapping interface with Mapbox.
Hmm.
So that'd be another external tool to AWS. It really allows us to take and display our max so far has been about 1 million markers on a map.
Wow.
In production, we've got a few projects that are upwards of 350,000 services. So we need to be able to display that quickly and fast, all of those other aspects. So we're storing our data in actually GeoJSON
Okay.
on S3, and then regenerating that as needed, seeing if it's dirty or clean. All kinds of different unique strategies to get that data out there. And then our next iteration will actually have GraphQL subscriptions
Okay.
to take any unique little data changes and not have to go fetch a large chunk and be a little bit smarter with it. And that's been a desire for a long time, but
Right.
it's you got to prioritize what makes it to the top of the list.
Excellent. Excellent. You mentioned generating this stuff to S3 behind the scenes and then grabbing it when you need it. Are there any other kind of unique things that you are doing in AWS that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think some of the more interesting things. And I don't know if this has anything to do with AWS specifically, other than MySQL. We're storing JSON objects directly in JSON data types within that platform.
Very
That
cool.
really helps allow us to move faster. So, for example, we were initially worried about not knowing the shape of the data, which I mentioned before, which we started out with DynamoDB because that's a NoSQL database and
Mhm.
doesn't really care what the shape of the data is. So we were attempting really hard to do that, and then when we shifted to a relational database, we started bloating all of our fields and all of our tables,
Right.
and it was just unnerving and ugly. So we generated an ability to dig into JSON data types within, say, a work order and have as many custom fields as we want as just simple key value pairs within that JSON data type. And pushing those back and moving through what that looks like. And then experimented a little bit with Elastic Cache and how those could come through faster.
Right.
To some extent, we're successful with that. But within the AWS realm, our next iteration of the platform is leveraging event-driven architectures with EventBridge and step functions for things like history events and for audit trail type of activities, those things, and notifications. So simply posting an event and having a type of whether it's a text message or a push notification or an email, and maybe which type of template it's looking for, a few pieces of body content that could be entirely different depending on the template,
Right.
all kinds of various different payloads that you can just kind of throw it out into the bus and let the rest of the world figure it out, and then your GraphQL can continue its execution and get back to the UI a lot faster than waiting for some of those things, and as in some of our earlier iterations of our software.
Yeah, and that brings a lot of benefits. In addition to isolating out what the GraphQL is doing and that stuff, it gives you the ability to deploy different things on different timelines, extend things without having to impact primary stuff. It's a really great architectural approach, for the right things. And it sounds like this is a right opportunity for that.
We really struggled with what fits and what doesn't, because it's like you got this hammer and you want to use it, and
Yep.
then everything looks like a nail. That whole analogy, and we just wanted to. A few of the team members, including myself, every now and then, were like, "Okay, well, we could rewrite this and refactor that," and everybody just kind of, "All right, stop,
Yep.
slow down. What's the best fit? What's going to accelerate us,
Right.
and make it more flexible for us to orchestrate things differently as we go into the future and learn new things that clients want and able to change."
Yeah, and finding that right time to refactor, that right time to mitigate tech debt is always a difficult decision, because you're balancing getting something done and working now versus minimizing the cost of getting something different working in the future. Right?
Very, very much so. Very much so. That's been the good segue, because that's been the biggest challenge that we've been working on for the last 15, 16 months,
Okay.
is taking and saying, okay, we're on version 4. Great. Let's keep everybody riding that bicycle smoothly, but we're going to create some pretty significant architectural changes to both the data model, the APIs, and the event buses, like we were talking about, and the UIs as well, all for their very own different reasons, and add the ability to have additional layers and functionality. And when I say layers, I mean really being able to show different layers on a map,
Oh, wow.
and articulate their infrastructure, the utilities infrastructure, better,
Hmm.
versus currently our system is really geared towards um, everything is a work order,
Right. Right.
period. So it doesn't really mirror their infrastructure very well. So, for example, in the water industry, if you've got pump stations, you've got hydrants, you've got valves that feed those hydrants, you've got endpoints for water meters and radios and pits and lids and all kinds of ancillary little elements. If you're trying to understand your asset management, we're now able to support all of that within our next generation. So all of those moving parts have really been the last 12 months of challenge to solve. And AWS makes that easier for us
Right.
with their next sort of iteration. I mean, the things that were announced during reInvent just recently, and just on EventBridge alone, around retry strategies and having custom retry strategies, and the event archive and being able to replay events, and all of these different aspects, because that was one of our biggest worries, is losing an event that had some key information that needed to drive another process or
Right.
whatnot. Um, but again, it makes it really easy, as well as it makes it really hard, because there's a lot of new shiny objects.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So you get
Just
blinded.
the announcement of EventBridge pipes and
Yes.
the ability to just by configuration run stuff from one event bus into another and things like that, or into other technologies. It's like, okay, that's impressive. That could
Hmm.
become unmanageable if we're not careful.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's very cool. So what other things are you guys looking at? What other AWS technologies are you playing with in maybe hopes of using them in the future or better understanding them?
Yeah. Oh, good question. Um, we've already talked about some of these. So event-driven architectures, we're studying, as much as we can. We started our studies about a year and a half ago,
Hmm.
when the transition from CloudWatch to EventBridge rules kind of happened. Maybe it was 2 years ago, something
Right.
like that. I'm like,
I
okay,
remember that.
that's neat. What's AWS doing there? And we got the gist of that. And then just recently, like we had mentioned, the addition and the empowerment of step functions with a more robust set of studio tools and things for prototyping and generating the YAML for
Hmm.
cloud formation of that, and really getting to a speed there where we can generate a step function within serverless and markup and build it all out. Great. Prove that out in dev, release it to production, go back to dev into the console and say, oh, what if we did this? What if we did that? And play all these little what if scenarios. And then go up and say, okay, well, now give me the YAML or the JSON, come back over to serverless, plug that in, and hit deploy. And the speed there is really exciting to us, around how we can leverage that technology in a faster way to allow us to be more flexible with our clients. And they always surprise us. I'm sure you've run into the same thing
Yep. Yep.
over the years. Okay, you want to do what? And
Want to do it
different.
how?
And if it's Tuesday after 3:30 but before 4:30, then it needs to work like this. Uh,
Exactly.
but only if we're exporting XML. And anyways, that whole drill. So we're really excited about step functions from that perspective, of that encapsulation, that orchestration flexibility, and the ability to move fast with those types of things. Um, Within RDS itself, and the Aurora MySQL, they've made some really interesting performance improvements as well. So we had talked about JSON data types,
Yep.
and we took and made a test because we were really concerned about leaning further into that more than we are right now. Um, and we took 1 million records, with 100 key value pairs in a single JSON data type, data field. And then we had 50 other fields. So the table was, a decent size,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Decent width. Yeah.
And the difference in querying 10 different keys out of the JSON bucket, and all 50 of the other ones, and not leaving the JSON bucket out of it, was less than 100 milliseconds.
Wow.
We were pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I was going to say you've
Yeah.
kind of proven your own performance and the flexibility at the same time.
Exactly. So now we have come up with sort of a nice play off of event bridge schemas, whereas our schemas define the key value pairs for all the custom data fields and ladder that up to a work type.
Okay.
So if you think about, hey, I'm going to go out in a truck to a location and do a specific set of things, to us, that's kind of a work type.
Okay. Okay.
Um, for example, I'm going to exchange an electric meter, residential electric meter, single phase, whatever, versus I'm going to replace a radio and a water meter in a pit somewhere in California. Two
So
different
you're
work
using
types.
the NetBridge schema registry to help you with this?
That's what we're trying to
That's what you're
decipher.
trying to play with, right?
Yeah, at the moment, we're leaning towards our own sort of custom amalgamation of a registry for work types,
Got it.
but easily be able to use EventBridge Discovery to build up those schemas and then feed that for our history events and notification events and things of that nature, as well as feed into the future of pushing more things through EventBridge and step functions. And whether it's we're indeterminate as to whether it's wise or smart to move away from GraphQL and REST APIs and so on.
Yeah, and I think the important part here, again, from my perspective, is independent of the technology you're using. What you are doing is you're defining canonical definitions for these things that
Yes.
you're standardizing on internally, which then enables the use of asynchronous technologies to pass this stuff around and process it, because you all know kind of the interface that you're working with, the contract that you're working with.
That is much better articulated than I said.
And I just
Yeah.
made that up.
Well done. Well done.
Well,
Yeah, we're excited
all
about all of those things.
yeah. So kind of looking back, so you said you've been working on the Conductive Digital peak workflow product for about 4 years, you said?
Yeah, 4 years. 4 years in another 4 days.
So thinking back through those last 4 years, you know, what kind of, maybe around 3 things have you changed your mind about around AWS? It sounds like EventBridge might be one of them. But, what are the things that stand out that said, before I would never have done that, now it makes a difference?
Yeah, good question. Definitely EventBridge.
Yep.
That's been one we've had our eye on for quite some time, and now we're excited that it's a good fit for us.
Right.
And the tooling is there, like I said, about the retry strategies and the event archive and some of those things, and the registry. The
Right.
registry is a really unique piece to the puzzle as well, that aids in ensuring that you can bind that back to your code.
Right.
If you're using TypeScript or some other strongly typed language and things like that, that's pretty fantastic and exciting. From one of the things that we changed our mind on, let's see, Amplify
Hmm.
is one. We started down a path, and that was not the right path. it
So
wasn't it
I'm
wasn't
going to
ready
ask,
for prime time.
I'm going to ask you, and this is more for people who might be interested in using Amplify. Were there
Got
specific things about the maturity of Amplify, your
it.
particular use case? What was it that made
Yeah,
it not work for you?
yeah, it was definitely the maturity of it at the time. I've looked at it since. I've toyed around with it, and wow, they've added tons and tons of good things to that platform. We're down a different path at this
Right.
point in the game, but just starting out. If we were to start this company today
Hmm.
versus 4 years ago, I would definitely spend a lot of energy exploring Amplify at this point in time of what they've built
Okay.
today. Our unique challenge with that is way back in the day, we needed it to manage over 100,000 records, and it didn't cache any of that very well.
Right.
And it wasn't streamlined enough, just from a maturity standpoint.
Yeah.
Today, I'm sure it'll do fine, and all of those things. So we ended up creating our own local database on the mobile side, and caching infrastructure and things like that. Um, but definitely look at it today. From other tools, really interested in how we what else is out there other than serverless.com
Right.
that is maybe easier within AWS. And there's a few things that were announced recently
Hmm.
around Application Composer,
Yep.
and a few other tools like that I think, given they look great out of the gate, um, but I think given a little time, those are going to be really interesting from a streamlined beginner dive in. You're going to be able to control most things.
Right.
The challenge with a composer or an interface, things like that, is you have control over the things that they allow you to control.
Right. Right.
Our situation was that we needed all the control,
Yep.
down to every last detail to ink out, all the performance and all those different things. So if you're first starting out, yeah, great. Amplify, Application Composer, some of those things are going to be
Yeah.
super powerful.
Light sail, beanstalk. Yeah, I completely agree with
Yeah,
you on those.
yeah, yeah, you got it. And I mean, EventBridge is really easy to get started with as well. And there's an easy SDK with that, and there's an export for the code binding.
Right.
If you're using TypeScript or C Sharp or whatnot, so they're really leaning in on how to get more and more folks started. Because if you think about it, they've got a lot of people on the platform, or
Hmm.
on the infrastructure or the services. um, how do you get more? Well,
Right.
you teach more people how to use everything, or make it easier to learn, or both.
Yep.
And they're definitely doubling down on both of those last aspects of teaching more people how, and making it easier to learn.
And so you mentioned serverless, and I'm a big fan of serverless because of how quickly you can get stuff done with that. But I've
Yeah,
also learned, like you were commenting, you're kind of limited to what the serverless framework provides you or what people have done with plugins. And as
yes.
soon as you step beyond that, you're back to writing cloud formation, whether you're embedding it in your serverless YAML file or you're doing it separately, or Terraform or something like that. Have you looked at Amazon's CDK, the Cloud Development Kit solution yet?
We haven't looked at that yet, so that's an interesting suggestion. I'll point that out to the team and have them
Yeah,
go poke around. What specific parts
not
are
to
you
turn this
thinking?
interview into a consulting engagement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well done.
On that topic, it's worth describing or looking at, because what CDK does is it provides a programming language based mechanism for defining your deployment. So you can write Python, Java, TypeScript, whatever. And just like CloudFormation, you can create all the lowest level resources. I want to create an S3 bucket and I want to do this kind of stuff, right? But you
Yeah.
can also build up functional libraries. You can build up patterns and things like that. So you say, hey, we do a lot of KMS encrypted S3 buckets. You can create a module that is create a KMS encrypted S3 bucket, define how you want it to work, and then everywhere else you just use that. So
Nice.
I've been working with some people who've been using that very extensively, even to the point that they've written CDK stuff that builds all of the infrastructure and creates pipelines for Azure DevOps to deploy it. So it's pretty
That's fantastic.
extensive stuff you can do. And, all of the syntactic sugar you get from serverless.com, you're starting to see some of that stuff come in to CDK, where no longer is it kind of this painful process that you had to do before with the serverless
Yeah.
application model. It's become simpler. So it might be worthwhile to take a look at if you're looking for how do I enhance what I'm doing right now around serverless.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Michael.
No
Sounds like
problem.
a solid one. I appreciate that.
I'll send you a bill after we're done recording.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of pitfalls you might have run into with AWS and recommendations you might provide to our listeners and viewers to help them avoid those types of pitfalls.
Yeah, sounds good. I think the biggest I don't know if you'd classify it as a pitfall, but the pitfall that we run into is again back to that shiny object thing, that there are so many services that have so cool, they're cool in their very unique ways, and then trying to understand, okay, what do I need to put together, because it's a candy store out there,
Right.
and you're like, okay, does this fit with that? That fit? How does that fit to that? And you can spend a lot of time cycling through and learning those things, which has its own value.
Yep.
Don't get me wrong there. But if you're on a deadline and you've got something that you need to accomplish, right, that comes out the other end, there's a lot to choose from, and don't get stuck
Right.
um, chasing little things and saying, okay, well, how does this work? How does that work? Spend a half hour, 20 minutes, looking at the different pieces. And if you're already familiar with the different pieces, great. If you need a database, great. If you don't, great. Store it in a text file in S3,
Right.
whatever, and you can still query that too. So there's 72 different ways to accomplish that task. Keep it simple. Occam's razor has not
Yep.
expired
No,
by
that's
any reason, and really kind of help yourself by limiting your time span of exploring.
yep.
I've spent so many nights ripping around till 2 in the morning and digging in different pieces and all those different aspects. And so that's when I say it's not necessarily a pitfall, it's an advantage
Right.
for AWS, but you need to be cognizant and navigate it well.
Yeah, I've run into that so many times working with various people, and it's like, oh, I want to use Lambda for this, and I'm like, okay, you could do that, but what are you really trying to accomplish here, right? And we did
Mhm.
an episode a while back comparing Lambda and Elastic Container Service from a cost perspective.
Yeah.
And your first
Okay.
response would be, well, Lambda would be cheaper. Well, Lambda's cheaper as long as you're under a rate between 12 and 20 transactions per second.
That makes sense. Yep.
Once you pass that, Fargate, especially Fargate on spot instances, is cheaper and it continues to get cheaper, right? So understanding, what are your cost profiles, what are your transaction profiles, just stepping back before you start picking technologies and saying,
Yeah.
what are we really trying to accomplish? What are our goals here? Can really start to narrow down the field from a dozen things down to two or three where you need to make the hard decision and you may need to POC.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other aspect is prototype, prototype, prototype.
Yep.
Um, you always need to prototype, and it's fine if you throw it away. It's all infrastructure that you could throw away, and
Well, and that's the
start over.
benefit of using Amazon and automating scripting your infrastructure and deployment
You
is
bet.
spin it up, spin it down.
Yeah, yeah, and it's absolutely amazing. So, you spend $2 maybe, and you got your prototype all done. That's
Yeah,
neat.
that's that always, even having been using AWS for so many years, it still just amazes me when it's like, oh, we just ran a test where we spun up 200 ECS instances with a load of 1 million transactions per second. We ran that test for an hour and it cost us $5.
Yeah.
You could never do that on premise, right? You
Oh,
did your best with what you had and you hoped that your extrapolations worked.
yep, exactly, exactly. And normally you're wrong. So,
Yeah, I've learned that numerous times.
yeah,
I've gotten to the point where I just assume I'm wrong and hope to prove myself right someday.
there you go.
All right,
Perfect.
so we've been chatting here for about 40 minutes. And before we start wrapping up, I just want to ask kind of an open-ended question. We've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything about what you've done in building peak workflow that we haven't talked about that you think would be interesting for our listeners to hear about?
Um, we have we have had a absolute wonderful time um, working in serverless land, if you will. And the team has been, we've had a team of 5, 6 for the entire 4-year period. And the on ramp time, like I said, the learning aspects, and some of it's steep, some of it not so much. You hire some people with attitude and aptitude, check the ego at the door, all of those aspects. I
Right?
think there's a people piece that maybe we haven't touched on. That when I mentioned, hire the right team earlier on, but it really comes down to, at the end of the day, these concepts aren't that difficult. There's a lot of them, and they fit together in unique ways. But if you look at Event Bridge, and it's passing JSON objects around that have attributes and a payload, and you can filter them and you can route them and you can do all these different things. That is really no different than, say, manipulating the DOM in React.
Yep.
uh, all of these different aspects that are just familiar to people already. So, don't be scared. Dive in, get your face wet. It's going to be great. Water's nice. And that's really been maybe something that we haven't touched on yet, is the people part. Having just a learner aptitude
Right.
approach to it is exactly what's necessary. Be patient, those types of things, but building that team that can be a perpetual learner, and that's in their nature, right?
Right.
uh, is a big piece of the puzzle. That, technology, great, but, well, okay, there's code starting to write code, but we won't talk about that in
Whole
this
other
session.
topic.
In our world, anyway, we still have humans writing the code.
Yep.
So, we need those relationships too.
Well, that's great. And talking about the learners out there, I'm sure you've had to learn a lot in building out peak workflow, you and your team. So if you had to pick, say, one resource, whether it's a blog or a website or a book or anything like that, that you would recommend to our listeners and viewers, whether they're brand new to AWS or experienced people, what would it be? I mean, what have you leaned on heavily?
Gosh, one thing, um, the internet. No,
Search
I mean,
engines?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's it sounds dopey, but we're constantly Googling different things and trying to learn about very specific things, which, are sometimes a bear
Right.
to get down to. But I'll mention again, reach out to experts. The internet is the internet. Some of it's true, some of it's complete crap.
Right.
And you get some people that are saying one thing and they're absolutely wrong, and all those aspects, right? And between you and I, we've had a long-standing relationship, and you know, reaching out and just asking a question. You
Yeah.
know, surround yourself with smarter people than you, and you're going to be looking good. But anecdotally, there is one book that really sticks out in my mind as I've kind of navigated um, both entrepreneurialism, leadership, and even development and all of those aspects. And trying to think of the book is called Switch.
Okay.
Uh, Chip and Dan Heath, and it's a book about change. And they spend 75% of the book talking about expectations, which I think is really unique, right? So if you think about and apply that towards software,
Right.
right? Well, you're trying to cull out what those expectations are from the end users, right? Or the business analysts or the business leaders or whatever the case is, and understand what all those pieces are. Great. And once you have all of that loaded up, then you can start to have the vision of what the product actually needs to do and all of those other aspects and so on, and get down to the other 25%, or even I think Einstein quoted it as 90% was understanding the problem and 10% was actually executing and solving the
Right.
problem. Those aspects. And that's kind of what that book meant to me. And there was a really unique analogy around an elephant, a rider, and a path. And one's sort of the emotional being, one's sort of the logical being, and the other is the physical path that system is operating in,
Right.
right? And the rider is sort of writing code. The elephant is the humans involved,
Mhm.
and the path is shaping the infrastructure and the tools and the technology to do what you want it to do. But chances are there's going to be things that go wrong, and you just have to rinse and repeat and iterate. And that's called software development.
Well, that's excellent. Excellent. Well, John, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day for us today.
Yeah, nice to
So,
be with you.
yeah. So, how can listeners find you online or learn more about Peak Workflow and Conductive Digital?
Yeah, good question. Easiest way to find me is linkedin.com/J Moberg, Moberg. And peakworkflow.com also has some information about the primary product or the flagship product,
Excellent.
and that sort of thing. And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us today. We'll have more interviews with wonderful people like John coming up in the future. And for that, I say good day to all of you. Thank you so much.